Welcome to part 2. This one is going to discuss some terminology of genetics. It can get a little confusing, so it's good we start with this and then we'll go on and do Punnett squares. So first, what is a gene? A gene is a section of the DNA on a chromosome. So you see the picture on the left, the whole thing is a chromosome. It's made up of the DNA that we studied in Chapter 3. The base pairs make up the letters of the gene. And how the base pairs are mated or put together determines what the DNA will code for in that gene. So a gene will code for a specific trait or hair color. It could code for things you don't see, like sickle cell. That is an inherited disorder. So genes come from your biological parents, and they get transmitted from mom and dad. And you always have 2 copies of the same gene on different chromosomes. So chromosome 1, on the chromosome you see there, that is not a paired chromosome. That is a single chromosome from one parent. So there's only one gene on that chromosome. You're not seeing 2 different copies. So we'll look at what is a dominant gene first. And here again, I want you to see that the gene is a section of the DNA that gets coiled up into the X that you see. And what they've done is uncoil the DNA so that you can see the pairing. Don't worry about the terms exon or intron. The whole thing there is a gene. If you have the dominant gene, it is the powerful gene. It overshadows or hides the recessive gene. Some examples are brown hair, right-handed. They're dominant traits. That's why they're so common in the population, because the dominant trait hides the recessive. And if it does that, you're going to see it very frequently. The recessive gene, here again, we're looking at a chromosome, and we're looking at the DNA that's uncoiled, and that's where the gene resides. This gene, the recessive, is hidden by the dominant gene. You can only see the recessive gene if you got 2 copies. There cannot be a copy of the dominant gene. If there is, you cannot express the recessive. So you had to get the recessive trait from both parents. So now we'll go over some more terms. A gene. Here again, it's the sequence of the base pairing. And what they actually code for are proteins. Your hair is protein. Your skin is protein. Anything in your body has been made from a gene that codes for a protein. That's why protein is so important in your diet. Locus. That is the location on the gene, of the gene on the chromosome. So that last picture we looked at, you saw the markings on it. One of the stripes could be considered the location of a specific gene, and that's called the locus. It's sort of like a map of the chromosome. Each chromosome has thousands of traits on it, and each little piece of the chromosome or the gene on the chromosome is considered the locus. Phenotype, that's what you see. Sort of like a photo. PH for photo, phenotype for pH. Genotype, though, is what's inside. It's what created the phenotype. It's the letters, and they're always in pairs. And that's because you get two copies, one from mom, one from dad. And the term homozygous means you got two identical genes, one from mom and one from dad. They both pass down the same thing. And that's indicated by two of the same letter. Either they're both uppercase or both lowercase. They are not upper and lower. That is called heterozygous. So homozygous are the purebreds that we talked about earlier. And the heterozygous has two different genes, always has an upper and a lower, and that's your hybrid. So here we can see two chromosomes. They've been duplicated already, so they're ready to split apart. You have one from your mom and one from your dad, and the locus is where each letter is located. So you have a gene A. You've got an uppercase A on the white chromosome and a lowercase a on the gray chromosome. If you put those two together, uppercase with lowercase, that's heterozygous. These two chromosomes are a pair. You got one from your mom, one from your dad. They carry the same genes on it in the same locations. They're both the same size. They have the centerpiece in the same location. Their legs and arms are the same length. And that is how they match them up. You have 23 pairs of chromosomes. And what they do is they mate number 1 with number 1, number 2 with number 2. And as they go through matching the chromosomes, and they used to do this, now it's done with computers, but before they had to manually do it with a microscope. They would put chromosome 1 with chromosome 1, chromosome 2 with chromosome 2, chromosome 3 with chromosome 3, all the way through the 23rd pair. Each of them are like a pair of socks. There's always two. Those are called homologous chromosomes. Now, I've said before, genes come in pairs. You have one from one parent, one from the other parent. If they're identical genes, both uppercase, then the molecular structure is the same. If they're different, uppercase and lowercase, then their molecular structure is a little different. They're called alleles, which is just an alternative molecular form of a trait, variation of the same gene. When you hear some of the conversations that go on, they talk about alleles versus genes. So that's the more technical term for a gene. So dominance versus recessive. Just a little review. Homozygous, two of the same alleles. Pure breeding, true bred. Heterozygous, two different alleles. They become a hybrid. So if you look at the letters below, the first one, uppercase, lowercase, that is heterozygous. Has two different alleles. But if you look at the other two, you have matching recessive alleles and matching dominant alleles, making them homozygous. The genotype is looking at the allele pairs. Allele, gene, if that makes it easier for you to think about it, but allele is just more technical. The underlying structure of the gene, the molecular structure, which makes up the genes. And here you can see allele pairs, and genotype are the letters. Phenotype is what you see, like a photo. It's observable. Dominant versus recessive. Dominant, the phenotype of the organism, is determined completely by one of the alleles. So when you have an organism that has male and female parts, if one parent is passing down the dominant trait, the offspring will have the dominant trait. All you need is one. Recessive, the recessive allele, if it's matched with the dominant, has no effect. It's totally hidden. It may come out later, but right now it's hidden. The only way you can see the recessive trait is if both parents gave it. So brown eyes is dominant and blue eyes is recessive. If you look at the general population, brown eyes is more common than blue eyes. And that's because it's easier to express the dominant trait. There are two ways to express it. You can have a recessive gene, but still have brown eyes. Whereas blue eyes, the only way you can get it is if you got the recessive trait from both parents. So here we're going to look at two genes and just go over and sort of review. The genotype is the letters. Gametes are the sex cells that make you up. The gamete, the sperm and the egg, was created through meiosis, and we talked about that a little bit. Meiosis creates the sperm and egg, and the sperm and egg only gets one copy of the gene. So that when the sperm and the egg unite, each has produced only one copy of the gene, but once they get together, you now have two. So, genes can be either homozygous or heterozygous. If they're heterozygous, that means the chromosome carries a different allele or version of the gene. So look at these two chromosomes. They're the same chromosome, the matching pair of socks, copy 1 and copy 2. You got one from the mom, one from the dad. In this case, I don't know. It's not showing the difference. And it's not important who gave who what at this point in time. We're just trying to get terminology. If you look at the uppercase P, that came on both chromosomes. That is going to be expressed in the offspring. That is homozygous for the dominant allele. Two lowercase a's is on another location or locus, and it's homozygous for the recessive allele, so that's going to be expressed. But then you go down to see a third gene. Now remember, chromosomes carry thousands of genes, and we've simplified this to only showing a few at a time. And this case, there is the recessive allele on copy 2 and the dominant allele on copy 1. In that case, it's heterozygous for that trait, and the dominant trait is expressed.